I might have predicted Florida to beat Tennessee when I did my preview and prediction show on Friday, but I can say with full transparency that I didn't even envision a scenario where it happens like that. I'm Brandon Carroll, the host here on Carroll's Cadence, and today on the show, I'll be analyzing the Gators' dominant victory over the number 11 at the time of defeat, Tennessee Volunteers. It'll come in a familiar format if you're accustomed to my work over at SIL Gators, because I'll be looking at the good, the great, and the ugly from Florida's performance, expounding upon the three categories I listed in the story that was published on Sunday. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and give me your thoughts on Florida's upset performance over the Volunteers below in the comments. Yeah, man. Let's get this thing rolling. There were many positives for Florida on Saturday night. And it's easy to get caught up in the things that went right with the game. But considering the current state of Florida's program, the current state of where things sit for the football team, I think it's important to look at the big picture. It's important to kind of not just zone in on the little things of the performance. The run game was great. The defense looked good. But the win itself is the first. That's the good, was the win itself. And there are three subsections to that win that I'm really going to discuss here today. And the first is just reconciling the loss from Utah. It was another Power 5 opponent, another Power 5 opportunity for Florida to prove that the performance they put out against the Utah Utes on Thursday, August 31st, in that season opener was not the team that they're going to field this season. Obviously, that immediately, there were already low expectations for Florida coming into this year. The loss to Utah and the performance and how they lost tanked even the already pessimistic outlook on the Florida Gators. It created a lot of turmoil for this team from a perspective standpoint, just the perspective of people perception. It made it, no one really knew what we were going to get from Florida. No one really knew what Florida was going to be going into that game, and it looked even worse than even the worst kind of predictions even hinted at. And with another opportunity to go and get a Power 5, and play against a Power 5 team, there was always the potential that another poor performance, undisciplined performance could have kind of allowed that loss to Utah to then snowball against Tennessee. And then there goes Florida's season. It could have really been detrimental to Florida's success in 2023. But Florida made the most of their SEC opener. They played inspired up to the competition and kept everyone engaged, kept the crowd engaged, kept the onlookers in any scenario engaged, and made many of the necessary fixes that they needed to make from a discipline standpoint, from a procedural standpoint, operations standpoint, how they wanted to run the football, and the play calling was vastly improved. It was a dynamic win, not just because of the end result, because of how they got there, how it came. It proved that the things that they did in week 1 against Utah might not necessarily be season-long trends that we see throughout the rest of the year. And because of that, it was that's why the good is the win itself. And then number 2 is, you look at Billy Napier's resume since arriving at the University of Florida, since his December 2021 arrival at UF. You sit back and say, okay, let's look at the grand scheme of things and how he's performed. Well, before this contest, he was winless against Florida's rivals. He was 0-4 against Tennessee, Georgia, LSU, and Florida State a season ago. Also had losses to Kentucky and Vanderbilt. And in the games that are littered with a prominent history, Florida struggled a year ago. And as a result, coming into this year, there was an effort to kind of reinstill some of the fire into this current team for these rivalry matchups. They knew that they had to make a way for Florida to at least be competitive in these games and eventually kind of climb into being a victor in these games. And they did it with a offseason series where they kind of broke down each rivalry, Tennessee being one of them. Former Florida linebacker Brandon Spikes, who was a prominent leader within Florida's run there of national championships from 2006 to 2009, he returned to Gainesville this offseason, and he kind of shared his hatred, really, for the team that came to Gainesville this past weekend as an assistant. Scooby Williams said on Wednesday that he'd just come in yelling every day, beat Tennessee all week long. And I'm sure that provided some extra juice in practice leading up to this contest for the players. I saw that extra juice in the contest with the way that Florida played. And you saw that they just didn't really like those guys across the field. And I think that's important. That's something that you have to look at and say, with how college football is, with the things that can be just extra motivators to perform, rivalry matchups can really give, especially a home team, that extra edge if they understand what they're playing for. And I think Florida understood what it was playing for beyond just a tally in the win column. They understood what it was beyond just the, being able to go out and beat another SEC opponent. It's Tennessee. It's Tennessee week. They had to kind of regain that after a few years of just not really having that fire in them to play these rivalry matchups. And it was arguably Florida's best two-way performance, at least in the first half, that they've had in years. Really, it's probably their best two-way performance that they've had under Billy Napier, if you don't count. You can also say South Carolina last year. But this victory, because of the opponent, because of the caliber of the opponent, and being the number 11th ranked team, it begins to kind of right the ship for Napier to end the difficult reality of not just struggling, but struggling in the most important matchups that he could possibly struggle in. And then, number 3, you produce an emotional victory, a dominant victory in front of a just massive crowd of talented recruits. An uber talented list of commits and recruits were in tow to watch Florida and take on Tennessee this weekend. And they didn't just see them beat Tennessee, they saw them dominate Tennessee. And LJ McCray and Xavier Mincy were notably in attendance for the outing. Those are Florida's top 2 remaining targets in the 2024 class. Really put an exclamation point on the class that they've been able to bring in thus far. You saw even more 2025 targets like safety DJ Pickett, who's a top 10 player in the nation, quarterback Ryan Montgomery, who's kind of being solidified as Florida's top quarterback option in that class, wideout David Wilson from Tampa, who's currently committed to Oregon, but Florida's looking to flip, and others whom UF will look to win over here in the next few months and really before next, December. Not this December, next December, when their signing day eventually comes. But as a result of getting this win and doing it in front of those pieces that they brought in, knowing this is going to be a high energy matchup, the crowd is going to be very much in tune to what's going on in the game, to provide that true swamp-like atmosphere that Florida has, been likened to for so many years now. And to do it in a fashion that brought the win that it did, that is a promising step in the right direction for each of them. And it turned into a quick result by locking down 2025 running back Waltez Clark from Plant High School in Tampa, Florida, who I'll analyze here on the channel soon. I'll give a little film breakdown of him and explain what Florida sees in him and why he's arguably their top running back on the board in 2025 and why it was so important to lock down him as they look to get Clark and another running back in that class. So, but just all of that being said, doing so in that environment in front of the LJ McCray, who is largely considered the best defensive end in the nation by some prominent staffs in America. Obviously, Georgia looks at him as the best defensive end. He's their top guy on the board. Florida being another team, Miami, Florida State. It looks as if it's a Georgia-Florida recruiting battle down the line here, and having him in tow to witness what Florida did, not just in the win itself, but also how they performed defensively, how they performed up front, being able to create pressure on Joe Milton. That was important for Florida to show as they look to kind of bring him into the fold and say, you're going to have the ability to come in, contribute early, and also perform on this defensive line that's vastly improved from the product that it's produced in recent months, in recent years, I should say. And so having that, along with his teammate, Xavier Mincy, who's a second member of the secondary, who would be a cornerback option for this Florida team, they had a number of pieces that were in tow and were being actively recruited before, during, and after the game. Billy Napier stayed on the field afterward for probably an hour or more post game, just continuing to recruit. And it may be an underrated aspect of this win because it does come in the recruiting trail. It's not necessarily football related, but it's a crucial one for UF as it looks to continue locking down elite young talent, which has been so crucial for Florida, really just in this game and since Billy Napier's arrived. Obviously, Jordan Castell performing at a high level. You're seeing a duo of edge rushers and TJ Searcy and Kelby Collins, and even Cameron James can be thrown in there. There are a lot of young pieces on Florida's offense, defense that are contributing at a high level, and they look to continue bringing that in and stacking this roster with talent moving forward. And over Tennessee in front of those pieces can be huge for how they progress moving into the future. And then the great of this competition, of this performance from Florida, was their tempo control. I talked about it in the pregame. I said going into the contest that there would be two main deciding factors in who would emerge victorious, and they coincided with each other. Who could win the rushing game on both sides of the football, and who could control the pace of the game, who could manage the game in their style. Florida ran the ball at a 64% clip, found vast success on the ground, and forced Tennessee to conform to their style of play rather than being the other way around. And side note, the way Florida was able to run the football was interesting to me because I said in my pregame show that they needed to establish the run early, which they did. But they did it in a different way than I expected them to. They utilized Trey Wilson significantly on that first drive before he got hurt. Kind of gave him several pop passes and swings out to the boundary to really get him going. And I thought that was so important for how Florida then progressed throughout the rest of the game because I love the tendency breakers that Florida had offensively. I know there have been people who have criticized play calling since, Billy Napier's been in Gainesville. I've been one of them. I still believe that an OC is needed to take things off of Billy Napier's plate as the head coach of the University of Florida, because right now, no head coach is being able to have the level of success expected of Billy Napier with the Gators that, allows them to be that offensive coordinator. You see it with Lincoln Riley, who's one of the best in the game. There's always something lacking there. You see it with so many coaches around the country that the elite ones, the Nick Sabans, the Kirby Smarts, they aren't doing that. They are managing the game. They're being the CEO type and delegating everything out to those assistants, to those coordinators. And I think that's something Napier needs to do. But in this game alone, I saw what many people have been clamoring for, and that's creativity. That's breaking tendencies. That's giving defenses different looks that might be a same scenario, might be the same personnel set, a same setup to a play, but you're breaking something that you've, kind of puts them and makes them second guess what's coming next. So early in the game, you have two pop passes to Trey Wilson. First one coming left to right, second one going right to left. And it was boom, right off the bat. And then later on the drive, you fake it as he's coming across the formation and hand it to Montrell Johnson or Trevor Etienne. And he goes up the middle for a gain of 8 or 9. And it's like, okay, they're starting to figure this thing out. Well, yeah, because they are showing different looks that Tennessee's expecting. Oh, we're about to get the same thing we just saw on the first 2 plays of the game. No, that's not how it works. They're showing that you're going to get the first thing, and then they're doing something completely different, which is exactly what Florida's been missing for quite some time. They've been predictable, but they weren't predictable on Saturday night. And that aided them to, at least in the early going, to set up what was the offensive production that they needed to be able to knock off at Tennessee. It aided them to give them that ability and open up the run game just enough for them to maintain success from start to finish. That's how you scheme up and call an offense. That's what Billy Napier's been missing, and he showed it on Saturday night that he can do it. And really, the first drive was Trey Wilson. That he was the main piece in that opening segment. Obviously, he gets hurt, which we found out today is not a long-term injury, which is a vast positive for Florida. But after he went down, it was the Trevor Etienne show in Gainesville. He had more carries in this contest than he did through the first 2 combined. Accounted for a career high in rushing yards at 174. had a score that was really the score that gave Florida the momentum that they never let go of. 62-yarder on an inside zone call really kickstarted Florida's onslaught of points in that first half. Obviously burst through the line and through the inside gap, and then bounced off tacklers and outran Kamal Hadden for a momentum swinging score. And despite giving up a smooth Tennessee-esque drive on their first defensive possession, which is exactly what Tennessee wants to do. They were moving quickly. They were moving well through the air. Despite doing that, and then turning around and missing an extra point, which I'll talk about in a second, that was the instance where Florida took control of the game, and they never let it slip. That is the point where they got it. That is the point where they took control, because they might have been down a point on the scoreboard, but the way they were running the football, the way they were controlling the game, was exactly what they needed to do to beat Tennessee. And on the clock management front, Florida forced Tennessee to, like I said earlier, to conform to its style of play. Obviously, net 183 yards on the ground. Had 2 drives in the first half of over 7 minutes, really setting the tone and not allowing that UT offense to get in a rhythm. And then when they did have the ball, Florida's defense stifled the run game. They rattled Joe Milton into throwing his first career interception of his Tennessee tenure there, and then got off the field consistently to really give Florida the ball back and allow them to have those long sustained drives in a way that allowed them to take care of business on Saturday night in the areas that they needed to, in the areas that I said pregame that they had to win to be able to knock off Tennessee, that I said they matched up well to do. They did. They ran the ball effectively. They stopped Tennessee's rushing attack in those light boxes. Often had only 5 guys in there and played a lot of zone outside and didn't really allow Tennessee to get anything going outside of the few big plays that they had for scores. They did exactly what they needed to do to not allow Tennessee to find that rhythm, find that kind of just tempo that they're so good at running when it does click. And Florida took care of business in the areas they needed to on Saturday night, and it resulted ultimately in that victory. That just Florida's tempo control won them that football game. Now, just because the positives significantly outweighed the negatives doesn't mean that we'll withhold judgment on this show. And I think a 3-week sample size is more than enough time for us to understand what trends look like in college football, what is going to plague a team from week 1 to week done. And Florida's most damaging trend held against Tennessee. The ugly was the special teams. It's still a problem. Once again, the special teams unit was a problem for Florida. And it started with Florida's first drive. They drove down the field, did exactly what they needed to, controlled the clock, had a 7+ minute opening possession. And then Adam Mahalik trots out for a 42-yard field goal, comes out with a low trajectory. It's blocked. Tennessee uses that momentum to then drive down the field, take the lead on Florida quickly, I might add. And it looks as if, Tennessee's about to take control. Obviously, Trevor Etienne bounces back quickly, has a 62-yard rushing touchdown. And then that extra point I talked about a few moments ago, blocked again. And it's like, okay, so Florida's had 2 kicks in the first quarter, and both of them have been blocked. And that's not even to mention that in the second half, when Jeremy Crawshaw saw the field and he was having to punt the ball away, he was only averaging 35 yards per punt. The punt average, yardage-wise, wasn't flipping the field for Florida. So they were struggling not just to put points on the board. They lost 4 points on the board. And Tennessee shouldn't have had some of the field positions that they did have, because Florida's defense did a great job at stopping Tennessee, but there should have been multiple points where they were backed up. But they weren't, because the ball came off the side of Crawshaw's foot and went out 15 yards before it should, really. And it's an area that will prove detrimental for Florida throughout the rest of the season. Like I said, this has been the product through 3 weeks of the season. It's what's to be expected moving forward. We've gotten beyond the past, if it can be fixed, point of the year. We're at the point of, okay, can the Gators win in spite of these special teams miscues territory? That's where we've headed, because they've continued to show that there's no reconciliation here for this unit in 2023. Because through 3 weeks, you don't change that much throughout the rest of the year. That is what they are. And barring anything just significantly different, obviously Trey Smack's kind of injection into the place kicking duties for Adam Mahalik was a positive for the Gators. He performed well in his limited role, had a sign of life, made all of his extra points, put through a 27-yarder at the end to kind of put the exclamation point on Florida's victory. He can be a positive for Florida and give them that little bit of edge that they need. But there's still several glaring issues within the special teams unit that just makes it known that there's going to be some issues for Florida all season long, and they're going to have to win in spite of the special teams group in some games. They did so in week 1 or in week 3. They may not be able to do so moving forward because it is a daunting second half of the year schedule. So Florida has to win in spite of that special teams unit, and it's time where if it can be fixed no longer applies. These things are sticking. These things are what Florida. But anyways, it was still a victory. It was still a dynamic performance from the Gators. They did so, made plays on offense and defense. It was the most complete performance that I've seen from Florida outside of that South Carolina game last season. And it looks as if they can kind of make something happen in 2 weeks against Kentucky. I have been pretty set in stone on my Florida-Kentucky pick for quite some time, but I might have to reconsider some things after seeing how Florida played against Tennessee and seeing how Kentucky's performed through 3 weeks of the year in their own right. So going into next week, Florida has an opportunity to ride that momentum against Charlotte, kind of give themselves even more confidence, and then find a way to win on the road at Kroger Field at noon on Saturday, September 30th. If they can do that, then Florida's in a great spot to kind of give themselves a chance to kind of eclipse that 7-win mark that I set out for them early in the year. If they can do that, they're in very good territory. But that's still to be determined. That's still to be seen. And I think that this week against Charlotte will be while it's not necessarily a massive game in itself, it is a massive opportunity for Florida to continue building, continue kind of just improving and giving themselves the ability to go in to Lexington and steal a victory from Kentucky in front of their home crowd. Thank you for watching another episode of Carroll's Cadence. I'll be back with another show for y'all on Wednesday before my preview and prediction show for the Gators matchup with Charlotte on Friday. Tentatively, expect Wednesday to kind of be a hodgepodge of topics, including more football talk, a look ahead in recruiting for Florida's 2025 class, and we may even dip our toes into the basketball waters for the first time in show history. Stay tuned for all that and more by subscribing right now. Go and do it right this second. I need y'all. I need you to hop on this bus because we're moving quickly. I'm telling y'all, you won't regret it. And I'm happy to have each and every one of you that are here for the ride. I'm Brandon Carroll for Carroll's Cadence. I hope everyone has a fantastic week. And I'm gone.